World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity. This is Clarity.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. It's 6 o'clock. It's Saturday night.
I paid for my crime.
That means only one thing. It's time for Issues Today. World Jam Global Radio.
My time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Now, my dearest friends,
I paid for my crime. Already did.
I wonder what would happen to you if a SWAT team wiped you out in an RTA crash and left you for dead. Ninjet, whoop whoop, tells a story right here on World Jam Global Radio.
But I never got home my own supply.
Charlie Graspy was running for office.
That's why I'm telling my story.
1 minute riding high.
I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stuff.
Before he knew it.
Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't
get his campaign wiped out.
And done my
criminalized and sent to jail.
Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
And now tonight, they're both here on World Jam Global Radio. Issues Today.
He could be facing life in prison.
Talking about their life stories exclusively tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, joining me from all over the world, from whichever corner of the world you're from,
did my time.
Wishing you a very good evening, and I hope you have an absolutely informal and educational time with us here on Issues Today.
Baby, my crowd, baby, my crowd, baby, my crowd.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity.
Did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Now, I've been looking at a lot of things in this past week.
My back so I can get my life.
Kendrick Johnson has definitely caught my eye.
Citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen.
And if there's anything that's caught your eye as far as police brutality is concerned,
not a man I couldn't.
Then you can tweet it. You can put it in the chat box.
I was swimming in women.
You can put it on Facebook.
I was
put it in the WhatsApp. Ask the questions. We'll try and answer it tonight. Charlie Graspia, Ninjet, live on World Jam Global Radio. Issues Today, coming up.
Being no gangster, life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this.
Our dear friend Dr. David Remay sends his apologies tonight.
I paid for my crime.
He cannot be with us tonight.
I paid for
Unfortunately, there is a death in his family, and our condolences and our prayers are with him right now as he travels across the United States of America to be with his family tonight.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Well, I've got two great guests for you tonight.
Superfly, but I never got home my own supply. I'm not
Ninjet and Charlie Graspy.
That's why I'm telling my story.
Both are very good friends. Charlie Graspy has actually been on the show before now.
Shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older.
Been a guest on a few occasions.
But again, I was young and dumb.
We welcome him back tonight also.
Real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common.
While our dear friend Dr. David Remay is away because of a death in his family, we'd like to have a special thought going out to our producer, Linda Sue.
Already did.
She's also away with family at the minute. Her sister's not too well. It's not our business. It's not yours either, but I'm sharing that with you in the hope that you will send out your prayers
The opening
and have her in your thoughts tonight
could be facing life
as we endeavor to travel down this journey of police brutality, unlawful killing, Black Lives Matters, Sandy Still Speaks, and all the other issues pertaining to police corruption.
World Jam Global Radio, this is clarity.
Yes, I am. 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 Trying to cope with this living here.
Let's just do a little rewind. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to just introduce you now because we have our guests who are ready to come and talk live about their life stories tonight. And first and foremost, let me introduce our dear friend and a regular panelist on Issues Today, World Jam Global Radio, our very good friend, Charlie Grapsby. Are you there, Charlie?
I'm here.
Well, here's an opportunity to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to our audience, telling them who you are and what you're about.
Well, I guess since it's the story of activism we're talking about today, I'll give you a little bio of how I became, I guess, what people would call an activist. I just call it a citizen. But most of my life, I wanted nothing to do with government or politics or law. I wanted to be a scientist. I was going to be a veterinarian. But when I went away to college, I did expect, there were things around me in the world that I saw that bothered me and that I wanted to somehow learn to be involved in. And I expected, the image of college in the late 60s, early 70s, where when you got there, it would be a hotbed of activism. But in the 1980s, there wasn't much activism going around. As I finished my first degree, actually, I decided I just sort of started speaking up more and I started reading more about the things that bothered me that I saw in the world around me. And then just in 1989, when Tiananmen Square occurred in China and the students stood up and then most of the country stood up with them, or at least most of the country that knew what was going on stood up with them, I decided to get involved, and I just jumped in head first, not knowing what I was doing, and just said, well, I'll try to do something. I can't be silent. I knew that something bad was going to happen. I began reaching out to the Chinese activist community, and then I began using the early days of the internet when it was still all Unix based and emails were not as easy, and you didn't have the World Wide Web, but you had groups and chat rooms. And next thing I know, I was right at the center of a lot of that in Washington, D.C., helping 8 of the leaders of Tiananmen Square. Most of them were students. One was a business leader and one was a governmental leader. The rest were students. Helped them get into the United States after they escaped China. Wound up bringing them around Capitol Hill, getting involved with trying to get bills through in Congress, testifying before committees, organizing rallies, speaking at rallies. Before that, I never was a public speaker. I'm a very shy person, but I began giving my speeches, began writing, and from there, it just kept going. I was at the University of Florida, and that university, it just happened to have a student government there that was controlled by this good old boy network. And when I say good old boy network, I don't mean just the good old boy network of student government. Their alumni network of the people who ran the student government since the 1920s, and the university's only been around since 1905, but they run the university, and they've pretty much run the state of Florida. And so I got involved. I became the independent and minority leader of the Senate. I organized coalitions to run against the parties that this group used. We created a newspaper. We did about everything we could to challenge them. When you fight entrenched power like that, you have to learn. There's no textbook out there. But I've always looked at it, if you want to if you want to defeat an entrenched, powerful system like we have, corrupt government pretty much everywhere in the U.S., in individual states, in other countries. You don't have the power to outgun them, but you have the power to outspeak them, and you have the power to out sort of expose them. And so you chip away just about at every corner you can, and you have a multi-pronged strategy, and you work from the top down, the bottom up, the inside out, the outside in, and eventually you can, with a very small number of people, make a huge difference. I got to be the point where I was such a pariah that they went after me very hard. They actually put up flyers saying I was a convicted child molester, which right before I was running for the student body president. That led to an interesting turn of events, though, because it gave me a door into what I had always thought was the key, which was the real judiciary, the real courts. And I sued them for defamation of character and for conspiracy to defame. And that was a pretty big task, because I'm not only taking on the organization that runs the Florida bar, that most of the judges have been members of, most of the prominent lawyers, all of the prominent politicians. But I also have to prove that, in a sense, even though they're not a secret society, they're a publicly recognized honor society. But in reality, that's just the front, and that opens the doors to power. It's actually called Blue Key. So we had to prove that they were a secret society conspiring, and we actually did do that using a lot of the same case law and tactics that had to be used to do so against the KKK. So in all of those experiences, I was learning quite a lot, and I did actually take them to court, and for the first time, actually had a judgment against them, and proved that they were what they were. Didn't make me very well liked among the elites of the state of Florida, and so I continued exposing corruption both at the university, at the state level. I got involved in a number of I was involved in, say, for example, the Howard Dean campaign in 2004, and that early concept of blogging with national politics, although I spend most of my time focusing on local government and state level issues. And one of the things I also have learned to do is to use the public records law very effectively, and to advocate for it, and to try and teach other people how to use it, and to try and build that as a key weapon and strategy into all of our movements out there that are really trying to take on this corrupted system that we see not just in the U.S. but throughout the world, where we have corrupt government leaders, corrupt judges, corrupt lawyers, and very, very frighteningly corrupted police. We have both corrupt individuals, and the systems themselves are corrupted. And so even if a good person starts out in it, if they don't leave and discuss, which a lot of them do, they become trained to be corrupt themselves. Now, they may not be the worst of the corrupt, but they're the ones who turn a blind eye to their fellow officer who shoots somebody in the back. They're the one who knows they plant the gun, laying in the grass next to the guy after he's been shot unarmed. And so I in about 2006, I actually was convinced to run for a state office, and I ran for the House of Representatives in Florida. And by reputation, people knew me as someone who rooted out corruption and took it on pretty much head on. And I had gone to this small town just north of Gainesville where I lived, called Alachua, Florida, and it was their election day for their local offices, and people came to me and told me that not only is there a history of stealing elections in that city, but that they were engaged in that right then and there. They were tampering with ballots. They were messing with absentee ballots, which they had done in the past. They were making threats to people, buying people's votes, threatening those who wouldn't support them, threatening anybody who had signs in the yard for the opposing candidate. These were pretty serious charges. And I said, well, I'll go that night and take a look. So I went to their canvassing board meeting where they count the ballots, and I saw indeed that they were breaking just about every law and were stealing the election. And that set off a whole chain of events that sort of upturned my life. But they started by arresting me. Well, I filed a lawsuit against them, and we pretty much proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that they stole the election. I mean, every rock we unturned only gave us more proof. But then they started arresting me. They arrested me for wiretapping, for recording the conversation that I had with the public official when he denied me the records. They arrested me while I was counting the ballots, after I fought successfully in commission, and dragged me out and threatened to tase me if I didn't stand up, which is kind of odd when tasers are supposed to make you fall down, which started giving me firsthand experience of just how broken both the law enforcement and the judiciary were, which was very, very frightening and disappointing. But they arrested me a number of times, eventually leading to a point where I was beaten into unconsciousness, tortured, given overdoses of medication, left to die, and spent a couple days in a coma. Still, so PTSD is something that both Ninjette and I have in common, from different sources, but. But in the worst part about that is that in that case, 8 charges against me, and they got 2 to stick, saying that I battered 2 law enforcement officers in a claim in which I went to a police station where I went to file a complaint, and instead a fight broke out, and I initiated it, and it was me against the entire police department. As absurd as that might sound, I still got convicted on 2 charges. After I was not allowed to represent me in the middle of the trial, we didn't have our proper case presented, all sorts of other things. The case should have been overturned, but Florida's got the judiciary is very corrupt, and even up into the higher levels of the appellate courts, where they issue what's called a per curiam affirmed, or PCA. What they do is they'll let in violation of the law stand, write a ruling, and therefore it doesn't set legal precedent. And so whenever you get these political cases or these cases of law enforcement officers abusing their power or government officials abusing their power, not only are you getting a rigged process, which I think you'll hear Ninjette talking about some of the problems of that. You get a public defender if you don't have a lawyer, and it's very hard to find lawyers. We don't have civil rights lawyers out there like we did in the 60s. You get public defenders who are already overtaxed in how many clients they have to handle, and under-resourced in what they're given in terms of budgets compared to the prosecutors. A lot of them, they're just in the art of making deals. So you start getting arrested even for the most trivial charge as an activist in America in particular, and it can just turn your life upside down. Well,
I want to come to that issue of public defenders a little bit later on. Let's stay away from that. There's a reason why I want to hold off from that now, because there's something I want to compare it to, because we have over here in the UK, we have what's referred to as a duty solicitor.
Yes.
Who takes it in turns to they represent a law firm that would normally represent clients in court anyway, but
correct.
There's like a rota system, and they're called up to be a duty solicitor for the day, and that's also at the police stations as well. You can request a duty solicitor, and those duty solicitors do not come from the DA's office. They actually come from a representative of a solicitor's firm that would normally defend you in a criminal act anyway. So
right.
it's so I want to touch on that a little bit later on. So let's not go into that too deep, because I've had a look at the stuff that you've sent me, and I do want to go into that a little bit, because I think you guys are sold pretty short out there in America as far as public defenders are concerned, and I can see just what a rough time you're having, just not by yourself, but also by some of the conversations that we've had with Ninjet. Now, Charlie, before we start getting into the nitty-gritty, let's bring Ninjet in. By the way, just in case you guys haven't already noticed, we also have an additional guest that I've just slipped into the show a short while ago. An Outlaw is with us as well tonight. Good evening, Outlaw.
Good evening.
All right, we're going to come to you. We will come to you very shortly. But let's just move on to Ninjet for the time being. Ninjet, hi Ninjet.
Whoop whoop.
Whoop whoop. Okay, Ninjet, do me a favor. Just give us.
I'm sorry, I thought this was a gardening tutorial. I think I'm on the wrong show.
Well, you can tell us all about your gardening skills while you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're about.
What I'm about, I'm just your basic garden variety nerd. I came up in Florida. I was born in Florida. Not that I would admit that very openly as a young person. I grew up in a neighborhood that was surrounded by people from New York and New Jersey, and I thought that I was living someplace other than the South, honestly. When I got to be about the age of reason, about 10 to 12 years old, we moved to a small town in Florida, and I began to see what the South was constructed out of the remnants of the Civil War, what had happened. And as a kid watching it, my idols were Martin Luther King, people who spoke rational, nonviolent diversity. I think diversity is a beautiful thing. And I'm an artist, and I never understood the tensions of things with color. It's not like being colorblind. It's just that being a Heinz 57 myself, I didn't see the point in judging someone based on the color of their skin or the color of their eyes. And so coming up in a small Florida town, like Charlie said, in the 80s, which was when I was a kid here, there was not a lot of activism going on, but there was a lot of tension. But the tension was not from the neighborhoods, from the people in the neighborhoods. It was from the law enforcement, the officials, things like that. If there was a problem, they tried to contain it. The information that was involved, they had a control on what information was released. There were several times during my junior high and high school years where there were murders, things like that, where it automatically was turned into something that was racial when it wasn't, in fact. And they would directly go to the black communities, and they would terrorize people in the black communities in order to keep them silent. And at about 14 or 15 years old, there was a lot of that going on. And about that same time, I was sexually assaulted. So that's the source of where my PTSD comes from. But PTSD is kind of like an accumulated thing. The more trauma that you get, the more interesting and deep the PTSD becomes. So that's kind of a little background from where I'm basically, like he said, I'm more into the scientific range. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. This isn't something that I just, hopped into as a lark. This is just something that as a human being, as a citizen of the world, when you see things that are not just, when you see things that are evil, it's necessary to call those things out. If you don't put light on that, then it remains in the shadows, lurking to harm anyone. And there is no range on who it will harm. It will harm all of us as an entire civilization.
Absolutely, and perfectly said, Ninjet. And there you have it. There's an introduction from Ninjet, an introduction from Charlie. But the real thing that we're talking about here tonight is being on the front line. And as a black man, one of the things that I struggle with especially in today's society, who wants to pretend that racism no longer exists and it's a thing of the past, is I'm expected to go yes massa, no massa, free bags, full massa, and as long as I don't talk about how badly I think we're being treated, I'm okay. I'm acceptable to others, and I've now got to a point where I no longer want to be acceptable to others if by means of me being acceptable to others it means me keeping my mouth shut to the truth. I can't do that anymore, and we're
exactly, and that goes for whatever color you are. That's the whole thing. As a person who's light-skinned in Florida, when you work somewhere and you have blue eyes and fair skin, they automatically think that it's okay to call Martin Luther King Day James Earl Ray Day. Right. They think that those kind of comments, and I've been asked myself, why would I stand up for people of color, people, however you want to term it, when I myself could pass myself off as just pure white? And I've had people who are of the white persuasion ask me these kind of questions, and it just boggles my mind as to why would you not stand up for your fellow human being?
Absolutely. Now, here's the thing. Before we go into some of your story, both of you, and Outlaw, I know you're still in there, and we're going to be pulling you in very shortly, because I know you're going to have a plethora of views to give once this starts to unravel. One of the things that caught my eye recently was the recent video of Kelly Thomas, the homeless guy that was battered and tasered and killed. And on a more recent video that's been doing its rounds, there's a view of all of these people who are walking around their cars, some with their phones out. And yes, it's something that we endorse, we encourage. Get your phones out and record these things, right? But the other thing that I witnessed on this video was the amount of people that was just walking around and saying, oh, this ain't right. Oh, this ain't good. Oh, they should stop that now. But nobody goes to him. Now, I'm not trying to make myself to be a martyr or greater or better than anybody else. But I'm telling you this. If I was witness to what was happening to Kelly Thomas that day, they would have to be arresting me too. There's no way that could have continued in my presence while I was there without me getting involved in conflict. And I think we as a people, and it doesn't matter whether they're wearing guns or not, they're going to have to shoot me too. Because I'm not afraid of death. In fact, I'm more afraid of living than I am of dying. Life is a terrible thing at times. But for what I witnessed taking place with Kelly Thomas, it would have been a very difficult thing for that to continue in my presence without me actually getting involved and probably being given the same treatment that he was being given, because I just wouldn't have been able to stand still. And I think there's far too much sitting on the fence and standing on the sidelines and watching these people attacked, beaten, brutalized and killed. And yes, it's great to have the records of evidence later on for us to say, yes, look, this is what we saw happened. But surely as a people, we need to be engaging more in this. An Outlaw, I need to come to you first before I go back to Ninjet and Charlie, because I know you're very active in this, and I just wanted to get your opinion on that first.
All right. Well, it boggles my mind. Like we've done a lot of progress as society comes, as far as having people have the courage to record and put online so that everybody can see when something happens. All right. That takes a lot of courage, because police, if they see you doing that, they will target you. They will intimidate you. And they try to get you to stop recording, and that's a problem. Just like we wanted them to have body cams on, but they can turn those off. And some of them don't even care to turn them off. They just keep doing what they're doing anyways, because they're trained to do a specific thing. They're trained to escalate the situation to get arrests, because if they can arrest people, they can indict people, they can put them in jail, they can put them in prisons, they can keep the prisons full, and the state gets paid, and so on and so forth. It's a never-ending cycle. That's why public defenders are activists. Pretty much have to rely on public defenders these days, especially where there's no huge community of activists. And public defenders, they're overworked, and they're officers of the court. And so they're going to do what's in their best interest to get you the least amount of time, get you moved on. But they're still officers of the court. So they're realistically, we have to question what their motives are. Are they just trying to get you a deal? Or are they looking out for what's best interest in the law? We don't know that. So unless you're able to go out here and do the research, present yourself, and have, the courage to stand in front of a judge and a jury, action should be, and some things aren't, we're not going to see a change.
Okay. Right. So that's a bit of the outline of where we're coming from. It's on the front line, the act of activism. I want to come back to you, Charlie, now. So you started off running for office, right?
In 2006, that when I got involved in the Alachua situation, yeah.
Okay, and then your character was defamed.
The defamation of character. That was when I was running for office in '95.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
So I used the defamation of character lawsuit to get them into civil court on a charge that. When the law professor who I had just met back then, we've worked together since on many, many cases, but I had already gone to him to talk about, civil rights violations of the student body that were systemic and 100 years old, and everybody knew about them, but they were being allowed to just continue on. And he says, that's a tough case to take, but I'll work with you on it, and let's pursue it. And it was in the context of that the flyers were put up against me. Like I said, call me a convicted child molester and purporting to be a criminal record. And he said, this is not only something that you need to take to clear your name, but it's actually, ironically, the best possible case you could have to expose corruption. And so I started to learn in that sometimes coming about it from a different angle is often your effective means, because the nature of the very dirt of what is happening in real life with these people in government and high offices and positions and people of power and prestige. And in regular cases where someone beats you up, or a cop beats you up, or a politician does something like intimidates you or causes you to lose your business, most of the evidence is able to be kept out of the bad acts and the bad actors. But the defamation case actually gave me a way to focus a case in on where that evidence was key. And so we were able not just to prove that what they said against me was defamatory, but we were able to prove for the first time that this political machine existed, who it was, how it worked, its inner workings, and who's involved, and how it's allowed to continue to exist. Now the sad thing is that had an impact on them that could have pretty much put them over the top, but they were able to hold on, and they still exist today, and they're still playing that role, not as powerful as they once were, but they're still there.
Everybody has an opinion, an observation, an experience of what law and justice is. And in Jet, you was obviously raised to do the right thing, to live the right way. I wouldn't imagine that you was brought up any other way. But you had an experience with the SWAT team that was to change your life forever. And I want you to just be, as we swing round from you to Charlie, I want you to lay down the foundation of what took place on that fateful day. That was to obviously impact and change your life and your opinions forevermore.
Well, first on the subject of how I was raised, my father was military. Not military as far as he was in Vietnam. He went to war when he was young. He was very young. My mother was very young when they met. They not only raised me right, but they raised me with love and raised me, what you were saying about the Kelly Thomas issue. Fear is not something that you allow to dictate what you're going to do. You do the right thing even if you are afraid.
Absolutely.
That is like a very important thing. And I come from a long line of military. My grandmother lost 2 of her brothers in World War II. Both sides of my family fought against each other in the Civil War. I've even traced it further back than that. But that isn't the point. It's not a matter of pride. It's a matter of that these young men gave their lives and pieces of themselves for freedom, for the concept of freedom, for the concept of the United States, or for whatever, as far as in my context. I was involved in a hit and run when I was 21 years old. I was working towards my college degree. I had a job that I was working at where I was kind of like domestic Peace Corps. I was a volunteer in service to America. I was working on getting a scholarship and a stipend to go back to college. I was by somebody who it later turned out was running from a SWAT unit. Now, during the course of this, in the beginning, I was concerned. Everything between my neck and my knees was pretty much shattered. I had to learn to walk again. My arm was reattached. It was a very long period of recovery. My family are the ones who dealt with a lot of the court proceedings and a lot of that stuff for me. But I went to follow the case in my wheelchair, in my walker, with my cane over a period of months. My family and I had to sit in this courtroom and watch the court case unravel. I was a victim in this case, but I was not treated with any kind of respect. I was not treated with any kind of respect at all. They were nearly as rude to me as they were to the criminals in the court, which was amazing to me. I mean, my own mother was treated with disrespect. And my mom never had an idea of what was involved with some things. And it really broke to have to sit sometimes 8 hours in this courtroom and watch this parade of people come through who were being punished way beyond the scope of whatever their crime was, being treated like animals, worse than animals. And it was heartbreaking to me. And being the person that I am, I started out, I was on the school paper in 7th grade. I took notes. I used that as a jumping point. But I never once, we were treated, there were some officers who were kind to us, but the vast majority of them were not trustful. They were not, they were very rude. But I never judged it on that. I still had kind of like the hero worship idea of the first responder. With the firefighters and the police, they're lumped together into this term called first responders. But that's kind of a misnomer. And watching this happen, I broadened my idea of what incarceration was. That was the first time that my eyes were opened, that somebody who went to jail might not be the person that you think they are simply based on a conviction. Right. But that was what shaped me as far as making me tough. My dad called me hard as nails as I was recovering because he watched me recover, and he was very proud of that. And he has always made sure to let me know how proud he is of me. I'm not military. I'm not anything like that. I'm a writer. But he's very proud of the fact that I stand up for what I believe in because he believes that he fought for my right to do so. Now, that being said, as I came out of that, I went back to my roots as far as what I thought I could do for a living based on my disability. I had a lot of restrictions as far as what I could and couldn't do just based on my limitations. I got a job at a small town newspaper nearby, and for a few years worked for them as a correspondent. Now, I've been interviewing police officers since I was 16, 17 years old. I don't really feel a discomfort around them. I feel that my role is to ask questions and that is my role when it comes to that. I photographed the first K9 unit in this small town. It was in the newspaper. So I don't have an idea of officers as something that I should have been fearful of, because I had to deal with them in an emotional sense in almost every job that I've ever had since then and before. So I don't really have a concept before everything recently, I didn't have a concept of police as something that I needed to concern myself with, because I was doing my job just like they're doing their job. Yeah. And there should be a mutual respect there for that kind of check and balance of what's going on. The modern police model, though, is like we were talking, as had been talked in previous shows, this is being made into an army for anyone, thought crime, to be arrested for something considered for not believing status quo. These are some of the things that are occurring that aren't in the mainstream media, that we aren't talking about, like as far as deaths, as far as murders from cops. This policing model is robbing families of their livelihood, of their freedom, it's ruining these family units. It's causing havoc on our entire system. In Florida, there's practically a 95% conviction rate based on pleas. They aren't taken to trial usually. This is not something that they are sure to plea, and it's not necessarily for their own best interest. It's that otherwise you're going to get something worse than what you would get if you plea. It's taking the lesser of evils, and that isn't acceptable.
Very true, very true. And I suppose we're going to cut that there, because we're going to come back and move your story on, because what was to later happen to you over just recent weeks is something that we did on a show a while ago, and unfortunately you wasn't able to be on that show, but you are here today, and we're going to revisit that, if you are comfortable with that, in a short while after I've gone back to Charlie. So Charlie, there you have it. Ninjette's laying down at this minute a foundation, a platform of understanding of what she saw as respectful, and a respectful attitude and behaviour towards what should be our law enforcement officers that are employed to serve and protect. And most people in general would have been raised with that same sort of quality of appreciation as to what that role of a law enforcement officer is to a community. And someone like yourself, who was running for office in different areas, would have been aware of the significance and the importance of what law enforcement means to a community, let alone to a state. And so therefore, come a time where you're now having to question how you're being treated. What was your initial thoughts as you began to look and unravel these situations that you found yourself in, where A, you were being fitted up, and B, the very people that should be supporting you were corroborating the evidence against you that you knew to be untrue?
Well, it's very disheartening. It's very frightening, and I think Ninjette will maybe elucidate on this a little bit more, because in a conversation we had the other day, she said something that I said many, many years ago when I first was the victim of police abuse, and that she said that when she was the victim, it felt like being raped. Because it is a kind of rape. It's not first of all, rape is an act of power, not of sex anyway. And it has to do with the absolute control that someone can have over your both psychological and physical body. And that's what happens when the police abuse the police power, place you under arrest for no reason, beat you up, torture you, mentally abuse you, all of those things. Those are really, it's a form of rape.
Okay, so
it's not the same thing, but it's a form.
Yeah. Absolutely, but there you have it. So on a first instant, you get what appears to be a disinformed cop who appears to be saying something that just doesn't sound quite right. But now all of a sudden you're going through life, and you're going through a time where you're coming across consistently officers giving false accounts of particular. Because I'll tell you one of the things that I found. You had people, because I worked in miscarriages of justice with Liberty back in the 80s, early 80s as well. I don't know if you heard of Liberty back then, but Liberty were the organisation here in the UK that mainly dealt with the issues relating to miscarriage of justice. People that were falsely accused, people that were falsely imprisoned, people that were facing charges that there was insufficient evidence to bring to court on. And Liberty was a massive organisation here in the UK back then. And what you then had was people who just didn't believe that police were corrupt until they went to prison. And then they came out of prison all of a sudden transformed, because they would come out of prison saying, like, there's a lot more in there like me. They went into prison and found loads of other people that had been sentenced for crimes that they just did not commit, and furthermore had the evidence in their cells to support the fact that they weren't guilty. But they're dealing with a system, a justice system, right, that renders them guilty even with insufficient evidence. And so now here you are, because you'd have been expected, when you ran for office, you'd have been expected to side with the DA, right?
Expected to side with the who?
The DA, the district, the law enforcement officer. You'd have been expected to side with that, right?
Well, the general expectations of the public are that you're supposed, if you run for political office, or at least the general expectations of those who are in political office, is they don't challenge anybody's authority that's also in public office. So, yeah.
So now you're going to be running for office over a system, right, you do not believe in or have insufficient confidence in. How would you have handled that?
Well, the way I handle everything, which is to first speak out about it. Second, as you're speaking out about it, you spend a lot of time learning, about it, learning the history of it, learning the facts of it, and then educating others as to what the facts are. And then you have to begin saying, now the question is, now that we know what the facts are, now that we're starting to articulate them ourselves and openly speak about it, which is the first major step, now we have to recognize that the system is corrupted, and it's corrupted primarily because there's a lack of mechanisms of accountability. Now, there's not a lack of them in theory. That's the police and the courts. But in practice, these are at the center of the corruption. So now what do you have to do to overcome that? And I just want to tie this to something that you said right at the beginning of this, when you said about watching the video and seeing all the people who were walking around and saying, oh, that's terrible, or worse, you get some who just kind of hide their eyes and just don't pretend they don't see it. And that's an important phenomenon to notice, because it's what people don't realize is power is not just one-dimensional. It's not just what someone can bring upon you by force, but there's also another dimension of powerlessness. Mm-hmm. And when you are raised in a context in which you feel powerless, which you are absolutely going to feel if you experience a corrupt police and law enforcement,
I'm glad,
because you feel the law is going to protect you, but that powerlessness keeps you silent, and keeps you the one who says, "Oh, I can see it, but oh, that's terrible." But I don't stand up and do anything about it because you know what's going to happen to you. Yeah. Now, the one positive thing is what Anthony brought up. The movement with cell phones and people starting to record has had a profound impact, because it's making people able to say, this is what I saw, and you can't turn a blind. Yeah. A lot of people say, oh, I don't see anything wrong with that. Oh, they deserve to get that treatment. But more and more people are now starting to see that the system that's presumed to be legitimate doesn't rest upon a foundation of legitimacy. So this gives us an opening to undo the powerlessness, using our voices, using recordings. I mean, it's not an accident that the first arrest that I got in the Alachua situation was over recording. And then after that, and this is before, a lot of what's been happening in the last 10 years, started becoming more and more, cell phone videos and putting it on YouTube. I started having someone follow around me with a video camera. And they went nuts. They went crazy, because these are the things that we can use to turn the tables on and give ourselves, re-empower ourselves. The same, like I was saying, was use those videos and those audios along with the public records laws. Go out there and demand to get the records, get their emails, show what they're doing, and force the public to see. Plus, when you start asserting your power like that very effectively, they tend to overreact the other way, and they pull the rug of legitimacy out from under themselves by arresting you for doing no more than speaking out or asking questions or taking a video. And that multiplies the number of people who had been in that powerlessness mindset to maybe break out of it. I mean, and once you do, it's like a gestalt kind of a thing. You never go backwards. Right. Once you start speaking out, you can never shut up. Yeah. So our goal has got to be, how do we encourage more and more people to speak out? How do we encourage more and more people to use those videos? And one of the things that we have to get back to again is that public defender issue. One of our weaknesses is, as an activist community that's growing in numbers daily, is we do not have a source of defense when it comes to going into a corrupted courtroom. The public defenders, even the good ones, don't have the resources. And most of them are just co-opted into a corrupted system. And then some of them are just bad actors. And I've had a few of those. But we have got to recruit ourselves consciously those people in the legal community who care about justice and want to do something. And we've got to start putting ourselves in touch with them, putting themselves in touch with each other, and being able to call upon them when that small individual, that one lone voice, gets knocked down, and when we can deliver that, when we can get that one person who dared speak up that first time defended in court and show that accountability can be held on these people, that's when we've turned the tables.
Funny, leads us right on to our next point, because right there you took us right to that point of dealing with corrupt police. And so therefore, I just want to move across back to Ninjet now, because before the recent issue took place for you, you were in an undercover form as a journalist and a reporter looking at an issue relating to police corruption, right?
In a sense, it was a lot broader than that. It was kind of like, imagine a sociology class where you're allowed to watch at close range not only criminals, but also officers interacting on a daily basis. That's the situation that I was in. I was able to watch up close this entire, and it wasn't so undercover. I wasn't the one who was undercover. The police were the ones who were supposedly undercover. I don't think they took me seriously as a person who had a voice at all in the beginning. I think most of them thought of it as kind of humorous.
But listen,
most of them treated me stiff.
Yeah, what I'd like you to do for me now, if you can, is reveal to our listeners, our audience right across the world now, some of the things that you saw as you was watching this live scene play before your eyes.
It was a situation where you had in Florida we have something called abatement laws, nuisance abatement laws. When this started, I was actually I had some rare edible tropical plants that I was working on making babies and selling them. So I had a different mindset going. I was reporting on bugs, butterflies, and bees, basically. That's what I was taking pictures of. That's what I was writing about. That was my main what I was doing. it's kind of like having something. The only way that I can make an analogy for you is if a safari moved in next door, and you had hunters, and you had lions, and you had giraffes. Would you not watch, what's going on? I mean, this goes on. It was like having National Geographic right next door, except it was like Breaking Bad meets Cops meets The Walking Dead, all happening next door to me. There was some people who moved, how deep they were involved with the police, the feds, whatever. Sure, that wasn't my main interest. My interest was the dynamic of the situation. The officers involved, I asked them, I made public, records requests for what happens for abatement. I followed that along. They were dealing drugs out in the open. They were prostituting out in the open. They were stealing things out of my shed. I had like about $5,000 worth of stuff stolen. I was afraid to go to the police. I've never lodged a complaint against police in my life. I have never sued the police, even though I had an opportunity with that car accident. My attorney actually offered to sue the police, and I refused because I didn't consider that something that I wanted to do. In my mind, they were not necessarily the good guys, but that's what they should be. So I wasn't going to penalize them for doing their job. But of course, that mentality, you learn as you go. I still wouldn't sue, even in the situation that I'm in currently. I'm not inclined that way. They kept expecting me, I think, to complain about them, and that never happened because I was more observing. From a sociological standpoint, it was fascinating because we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of criminals coming in and out of next door, and I say criminals in quotes because there's a very fine line between what we think of as criminal. When an officer does something wrong, is he a criminal or is he still an officer? I've had a lot of discussions with people saying, that you can't call them criminals. They shouldn't go to prison because they get treated more, harshly. However anybody wants to think about that, the criminal activity, the closer in proximity that it is to criminal activity, the more likely he is to engage in it. That's just scientific fact. They've talked about this rule of thumb to do something that is not professional. That's just simply whether it has to do with how much they harden because of the job, that. But as far as what I saw, I would speak to officers. They would come next door to arrest someone, and I would videotape the event, interview the officer, interview the person involved on camera, and see what the dynamic was. These officers would come next door, and the people next door had a dog, a large dog, but he was a very friendly dog. On at least 7 different occasions, officers would threaten to shoot the dog for no reason. And I was standing right there with the camera, and I'm like, hey, guys, I'm right here. Can we not have any dog killing today? And it would be like a joke. They would laugh. Well, I've been bit by a dog before. Well, I delivered flowers for 4 years, and I was bit by dogs, almost monthly. You would have a dog chase you or bite you. I never shot a dog. I've never harmed another human being in my life. I've never done any violence to anyone, nor have I wished to. That's the part that I don't understand, is that we have a lot of professions that have a lot of danger to them. And you don't just go around shooting things. These officers seem like they're fearful going into the situations they're going into. And that is my concern, is because if you're already fearful, fear is the thing that really creates a lot of interesting situations for people. Fear is the biggest problem. These officers, when they come into a situation and they're fearful, they are more likely to do harm regardless of what the situation is. If they already have, and I understand that they have to be very careful, but being careful and prudent is much different from being fearful. Yeah. If you're fearful, you're more likely to shoot that gun, that taser, to use force, to, think of yourself as in some, they think of themselves in using the uniform. There is that, and we are not, constantly operating on that same system that they are. When these officers would come next door, they would be, there was dozens of arrests, dozens of raids, dozens of, interactions that I witnessed. I spoke to the people who were being, brought into the system of mass incarceration. I, found out exactly what they know and don't know about the system itself. A lot of them we're talking about highly intelligent people who are being roped into the system of mass incarceration. And the thing that the police think is cooperative to the police means, are you useful to their agenda? Cooperative doesn't mean, are you civil? Are you polite? It doesn't mean any of those things. It means, are you useful to what they have going on at that time? A matter of cooperation with police is not what it used to be. It's not like you just say, this is going on next door. Hey, what can we do about it? A lot of these officers were not happy with the fact that I was pulling records, that I was following cases. I have several different cases that are currently going through the courts right now or have been disposed, that I have been following to see the matter of consistency with how the courts deal with different cases. And having had this opportunity, which, as horrible as it was, when you have lemons, you make lemonade. And that's all I tried to do.
Oh. Well, the thing is, when you talk about fear, I understand that, and I can understand that fear can also lead to somebody panicking, because that's what fear does. It makes you panic, and in that reaction to panic, someone will pull out a gun, they'll pull out a taser, and maybe bring harm to either an innocent or etc. But the level of corruption goes even far deeper than that, because what we are seeing an increased of consistency on is police officers who are brutalizing individuals who are already handcuffed and in a position of captivity. Now, that's
where you get into the adrenaline rush. Right. Now, see, that's the thing. When these people are addicted to the adrenaline, and for them to feel like they are better than a person who is addicted to another substance really irritates me, because an adrenaline junkie is often a person who is very dangerous. And then if you combine different sociological aspects of the person, as far as, if they have some kind of issue, as far as if they're already an angry person, if they're on steroids, if they have other issues, if they're fearful, then they have that adrenaline rush, then where does that adrenaline go? You know what I mean? They're going to do something ugly simply to get that out. There's a lot of them that get off on, and that goes back to, and it's very difficult for me to still talk about, because what Charlie touched on was very important, that these are acts of power. These are acts of trying to make you submit. These are psychological rapes in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. And I had thought myself completely healed over my sexual assault when I was 14. I honestly believed that my biggest PTSD issue was to do with hospitals and things like that. And courtrooms are a very big trigger for me. And that comes from my car accident. But what happened to me with my recent issue, it harkened back to something a lot more deeper and visceral than just making me fearful. It actually, like you were talking about the panic, it struck at the heart of what makes me the most fearful. And it when you're dealing with the police, when they take this offensive with you, it is like being trapped in a place with a bully with a gun. Mm. I mean, these people are getting off on your fear. They want you to do something that allows them to be aggressive. And if you open that door, they will. It's not your fault that you're doing it necessarily, because when you talk about PTSD, when you talk about the basic human response to fear, not to do with PTSD, you have fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
And in a situation where you're trapped with a bully, fight and flee are the two things that are the first uppermost, at least for me. And you're talking about people who, if you do either one of those things, they may do something to you that you will not recover from. As is, with what you were talking about, current things in the news, the Corey Jones shooting that just happened here in Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but I mean, we're talking about, a cop who didn't have his badge on him, who didn't identify himself. And we had a 31-year-old black man who had just gotten his concealed carry and his pistol to carry with him because he was coming home late at night from, his music. He was a drummer, a musician, and coming back from gigs late at night. He got it for his protection. And then we have an officer who doesn't declare himself, who doesn't show a badge, and who shoots 6 times, hits the guy 3 times, he's dead. And then what? This is not a situation where the corruption goes so far up the ladder that the officers are simply responding out of the attention that is on them. And there isn't more violence against them. It's more violence from the police towards us.
Absolutely.
To try to control what is going on.
There's another dimension to all this. And it's not just corrupt cop or judge or systemic corruption. The mechanisms are corrupted. The training process is corrupted. The internal checks and balances are corrupted. You have to understand is the law as it used to be written, and still as it is mostly written, the formal rules, the formal laws make most of what these officers are doing unlawful. Now, unfortunately, those laws are being eroded away and legitimizing a lot of this to some extent. But the way it happened is the key to understanding the nature of the problem. What you have is it's the unwritten rules, the unwritten norms that the police culture, and it's become a whole industry itself, but the police culture didn't like the limits that were placed on police, didn't like the idea that they couldn't shoot to kill if they felt fearful. They liked the idea that I have a wife and children to go home to, so if my life is at risk, you're the one who's going to take the fall. I'm going to shoot first and ask questions later. The law was never legitimating that, but it has become in practice legitimated through these unwritten norms. The police unions and the police organizations and industry have sort of spread around the country. They have been adopted informally by the hierarchy in the police departments, including the chiefs. They have become accepted and utilized by the prosecuting attorneys, and they've become accepted by judges who turn a blind eye to it.
Well, that's because they're profiting. That's the whole point right there. You hit on it entirely, is because it's an industry now. We've got mass incarceration, which makes money. And as soon as you make criminals in order to punish them for revenue, then you have to have the police force, backing that whole play.
Well, that's definitely also, a very significant aspect of it. There's no doubt. I mean, Florida, the number one industry is corrections.
They call it a recession-proof industry.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, most of North Florida are very, very rural, very low populous counties that actually probably have more inmates per population than they have actual residents. But that's their prime industry is corrections. Columbia County, Clay County. They have prison after prison. And just about everybody who works there either works in the jail or for some that supports the jail. or just the grocery store that feeds the people who work in the jail.
Listen, guys, Ninjet's touched very briefly on the Corey Jones issue. Now, this was news that we picked up on last, I think it was last Saturday, and we in the UK we've had no update. The last thing we heard was this was a guy who had car trouble, and at one point the police actually hadn't even revealed who the name of the body of the man that they'd shot, and there's some big outcry going there. What is the latest that you guys have out there in Florida on this Corey Jones killing, murder?
There's a photograph. There's a photograph that shows his car on the side of the road, where he was waiting for the tow truck, and then it shows the van that the undercover officer was driving, and it is at an angle across, I believe it was I-95. It's across several lanes of traffic aimed towards his driver door. Now, I don't know about you, but when you stop to investigate something, he said he was investigating an abandoned car, the officer did, and then he said he was offering assistance. I don't know about you, but if I'm offering assistance to a car on the side of the road, I don't block 2 lanes of interstate traffic to do so, and not in an aggressive manner like that. This was an aggressive. You could tell just by the way that the vehicles were sitting that there was an aggressiveness to the situation somewhere.
The bottom line is, from what we initially gather, and I'm not sure if all of the reports that we get over here are true, but he was on his way home from a band rehearsal session. And he'd called his brother for assistance because he'd broken down in his car on the way home. So far as I'm aware, he'd called his brother to come out and give him some help. Now, this is also a guy, I believe, from the reports that I've had, is also a local church drummer, right?
Yes,
he plays drums for a local band in the church, which gives some idea of his pedigree of a human being and what his lifestyle might be like, which would suggest that at the very least he was a very peaceful and law-abiding citizen. His color of skin does not justify anybody to assume that he may be a criminal. This guy was a law-abiding, from what I can see, a law-abiding citizen who was a musician and a drummer, and apparently well-known in the community as a peaceful guy as well. So surely there has to be some explanation that the police must give as to how this escalated from a guy who had contacted his brother saying that his vehicle had broken down and needed some help, to them getting into some kind of an altercation with him, which he would not need to get into with them because he was not that kind of guy. I mean, what has been has anything come out as far as the police are concerned to try and justify how they reacted?
There's only one. First of all, you have to understand is that the police have that unwritten rule is that and that the courts have accepted is that the police officer merely has to say he felt fearful for his life. Now that's a ridiculous standard, but what follows from that is you will almost always find the claim that I believed he was armed. And what we have now is there's a photo of a gun laying, almost like in the grass, and the news has clarified that yes, this gun is the gun that was recently purchased by him and registered to him. It checks out. Now, does it mean he had the gun out? No. Does it mean that the gun was planted? No. But does it give you the impression that at some point that this gun was manipulated into the situation to give the justification for the shooting? It looks far more like that than it would a gun that was held in his hand, let alone waved aggressively toward the police officer or something like that. It looks like, as we've seen so many times, guns that are planted. And we also know police have a tactic.
Well, and the
they have
officer did not declare
guns.
himself.
Yeah. He actually
no, he was an unmarked vehicle, not in uniform. Didn't, of course, all of that's true. I mean, because it's plausible that he did have his gun for protection out, and that so. But it doesn't even look like the photo of the gun. It reminds me of a case not long ago in Albuquerque where a young woman was shot from in the top of the head down. And then, oh, hey, look, there's this holstered gun sitting there on the sidewalk, far away from, close enough to her to be part of the scene, but far enough away that it made no sense that if she had the gun in her hand, that's where the gun would have ended up, and it would have looked like that. It looked posed. And to me, this gun looks posed.
Well, and even if you take that out of the equation, whether or not the gun was waved, whether or not whatever, if the officer did not declare himself an officer, which they think Corey Jones died, not even knowing that his murderer was a cop, when you take into consideration that you have a person in plain clothes approaching you who is armed, and you are on the side of the road, broke down, I mean, for him not to declare himself an officer, he didn't even, according to what I've gathered, he didn't even have his badge with him at all. So, whatever capacity that he was riding around in 3 o'clock in the morning, it was not a situation where he was even prepared to declare himself a real officer.
Now you marry that to the situation the week before. Let's spin the clock back another week. You marry that to the situation the week before with Patterson Brown in Chesterfield, where an off-duty police officer shoots dead a man in a car wash. Are you guys familiar with that story?
Where was this?
Chesterfield.
I think I did see something about it, but I don't know if I know the details.
The bottom line is the guy. They're claiming that the guy didn't work for the gas station. He drove the officer's car through the car wash. There's no suggestion or evidence to suggest that he was going to steal the car, but this is an off-duty police officer who'd taken his car to the car wash. And then there is evidence that the off-duty police officer struggled with Brown and then shot him dead. But up to now, they can't actually tell you what they've found no weapon from Brown. He had no weapon. He didn't pull out a gun. They haven't been able to produce a gun. They haven't even been able to plant a gun in order to support this officer's theory. But what there seems to be is a continual issue of police officers offloading their guns on young black men. In various circumstances and situations that don't justify death. Some of it doesn't even justify an arrest. You go back to Corey Jones, and there's nothing that they can suggest that gives you an impression that there was an issue to even arrest him for. Then you go to Patterson Brown, and you're looking and you're saying, well, there's not even an issue where you could suggest that he did anything criminal in order to arrest him for. But these are individuals who apparently have no issue as far as previous convictions are concerned, no record of police interaction, no records or criminal convictions for violence in any shape or form, but they're all now dead. They're all now dead at the hands of a policeman's gun. And I suppose the question that's been begged here is, why is this such brutal and fatal force being exhibited on every approach where there is a man or woman of color involved?
Well, that's. Let me say it this way first. It's not exclusively limited to any community. It is extremely disproportionately distributed in minority communities. But that's also logically entailed in the fact that all police abuses and all over-policing is being disproportionately centered in those communities. So there's going to be more interactions that are going to lead to confrontations, that are going to lead to abuses and misuses of force. But it's the perverse nature of how this has become the unwritten norm and, in a sense, has been legitimized. And the police really see themselves as acting legitimately. And it's because, one, the rest of the system has taken away the accountability from these kind of actions. Written norms of the police themselves are that you shoot first, ask questions later, that you shoot center mass, meaning you shoot to kill. The minute you pull your trigger, you shoot to kill. That's never been formally recognized as legitimate police training, but we know that there are so-called experts out there in this police industry that are going around teaching this. And we know that they are teaching it to departments, and the departments are informally adopting that they're being taught when you start to shoot, when you shoot that first bullet, you empty the whole gun before you stop shooting. Now, all of these things are supposed to be uncharacteristic of police encounters. They're supposed to be things that should be in themselves shocking. But because they become so normalized, and this whole industry of the police culture and all the accountability agencies, such as the courts, have tacitly accepted this has remained silent. It's been going on for a couple decades now, growing exponentially, and it's only in the past 2 to 3 years that it's finally starting to get widely known. But there have been many people, such as we're talking with here, who've been dealing with this for years before anybody even paid attention. But to watch it grows so fast that it's almost impossible to stop through any normal channels, because before you can even make a noise about the problem is already tenfold worse.
So now what you have you now have generations of individuals who are now more fearful of the police than ever before. And so therefore, when they are being confronted by the police, their behavior, their attitude, their mentality is going to be one of fear and panic, unsurety, sure. Right? They're going to feel insecure in that approach, and as police, because it's more often than not now, police are approaching with their hands already on their guns,
right?
And so now people are beginning to be in fear for their own lives, in a situation where they're going to be arrested, and that takes us right on to the point that I really want to move on to very quickly, is to, again, that takes us to where Ninjet now was being pulled over by police officers, and who didn't identify themselves, and who were carrying guns. So let's quickly flip that, and you can tell us from a ringside seat position, Ninjet, what it felt like being approached by officers when you are already in the knowledge that these officers are corrupt. Or officers are corrupt, and you've been involved in activism for a while now, so that you're aware that innocent people are being shot by police who are being... Tell us about that experience, and if you can, and if you are in the right state of mind to do so, tell us the panic that it put you through, and how you felt when you're being approached by people who didn't identify themselves, because that's similar to what Corey Jones went through. That no officer identified themselves to Corey Jones, and this Patterson Brown, he was killed dead by an off-duty police officer, and we also learnt with Ernest Nunez, he was also killed by an off-duty police officer, an officer who had actually finished his shift but decided to go and wait outside of his house, right? Because this guy was known, he had breached a probation, or I think it was a P test or a drug test with his probation, and whatever it was, and so there was a warrant issued out for his arrest. He hadn't committed a criminal offence, he was just in breach of his licence, and this officer pursued him and shot him dead on his doorstep while he was off duty. So I just want you to try and give a real sense of what it was that you felt, Ninjet, when you were stopped and approached on that last occasion, if you don't mind, and you can.
I will try. First, I would like to also point out that the climate of modern policing has also lent itself to the generation of tactical units, what we call SWAT units.
Right.
These tactical units are intentionally filled with the most aggressive officers. This is something that they openly talk about as part of their how they put together their units. The officers who are the most aggressive are the ones who are used for these tactical units. On the day that I was, let me also say that I'm a bit of an agoraphobic, so to go out for me, most of the filming that I did of the police and interviewing was right from my front yard. It wasn't like I went out and actually tried to engage them, other than in the pulling of the records, in which case I wasn't engaging them, but I was putting my name on it. So I was known to probably several dozens, if not at least a couple hundred of the officers, I'm sure, knew, at least of some of my activity. On the day in question, I was, there had been a big case that I had been following that had just summed itself up. I had felt fearful enough not to go to court, if that tells you anything. I needed to get some air, needed to get out of the situation, went for a ride. As I go out in my business, I often videotape, and not to videotape cops. I'm videotaping the scenery, what's going on in the neighborhood, different things like that. I generally have a camera in my hand 24/7. That's just kind of how I am. On this particular day, there was a large amount of officers on the side of the road. I didn't think anything of it. This is just the way it is around here. You see cops a lot of times, and they're just there. A few moments later, one was aggressively pursuing, I found out later, pursuing me. I didn't know it was an officer at the time. It was an unmarked vehicle. When they put on their lights, I thought that they were going around me, because that would generally be the situation. From the point that I got pulled over, the pullover itself was aggressive. I wasn't sure what was going on, and then a large group of people, and some of them were marked vehicles, I think, and it was a lot of commotion. At that point, I started to shut down a little bit because of the panic starting at that point. They were behind my vehicle for a long amount of time, in excess of 10 or 15 minutes. I called 911 to do, for a couple of reasons. Number one, to declare myself not a threat so that I wouldn't be shot, because this was a tactical unit. And I was afraid that perhaps they thought I was someone else. Whatever the case, that wasn't the point. I wanted to declare myself not a threat, and to find out what they were doing, because I didn't know if this was, I didn't know how it was going to go. It was very frightening to have a large amount of people, just people, behind your vehicle, and you're at a stop point. The unmarked vehicle had dash lights and had gotten behind me, and had pulled me over. I'm not sure I can talk about this, actually. It's been a minute now, and it's making me upset right now.
Okay.
The way that it makes you feel is the panic got to the point where, on the phone with 911, after I called 911, then they finally approached my window, and it was still very aggressive. Their demeanor was aggressive. They were not at all in. I've been pulled over for tag lights. I've been pulled over for a headlight out. I've never had a situation where I felt like I was in danger. I literally begged the 911 operator to stay on the line with me because I was so afraid. And the thing is that then, they said, roll down your window or we're going to break it, or we're going to arrest you. So I complied out of fear. When they did get me out of the vehicle, they then arrested me for calling 911. And Yeah, I gotta stop there for a minute. You guys pick it up.
Yeah, you go. You. I mean, I can hear you very emotional, and I really want to be mindful about what we put you through right now. I want to call in Outlaw if you're still there, Outlaw. Hi, Outlaw. Okay, I'm not getting Outlaw at the minute. He is online somewhere. But Charlie, both you and Outlaw worked very hard on supporting. We all did, but you and Outlaw in particular worked very hard on supporting Ninjet at this time. And you as well, especially, had to deal with a lot of the emotional breakdown that took place around that time. Do you want to explain how this left her feeling for herself after she'd been through that experience?
Well, for anybody going through it for the first time, not having already a PTSD foundation, this is a traumatic and frightening experience. It makes you feel helpless. It makes you hopeless, and you fear for your life, and because it's the very people that you're socially told that they're supposed to be there for your protection, and yet it's turned around the other, complete opposite. I mean, this is it's terror at its height. And when you add that to someone who's already vulnerable to this because of past traumatic experiences and the PTSD, it becomes overwhelming. But I just want to add one dimension to this, and that is, you see, there's a perverse logic that the police are using and following, and it's become normalized. And it is, they don't look at this as a democracy in which they are public servants and we're the citizens they serve. They look at it as almost an authoritarian kind of way, which puts it in historical parallels with a lot of, very dangerous periods in human history where the state has turned violent against its own people while most of the people sit and remain silent. But the logic that it really is reverse logic police are being trained to use is that you must defer to them at all times. You must always be deferential. So if they yell at you and you've done nothing, you need to stop. You need to look, and you need to listen, and you need to listen and only be heard when they, like a child, only be heard when they ask you what to say something, and only say what they want to hear. And they actually turn it. This is where the use of force comes in. They've redefined resisting arrest. Resisting arrest is supposed to mean you've put up a physical force to stop from being arrested. Resisting arrest no longer means that, in the state of Florida at least. It is really, and it's a joke, it's called contempt of cop, but that's actually standard. It's you've done anything to oppose a police officer in the lawful exercise of their duty, and anything is considered lawful if they just command you to stop, drop, listen, get on the ground. If you don't do it immediately, that's called resisting arrest. Resistance is a kind of force. I mean, it's a synonym for force. That means that they engage what they call a hierarchy of use of force spectrum that they're taught. And so they immediately go to physical encounters with you because you are opposing them, even though you're not using real force. So they get to use another force, a counter force, and it escalates to guns and shootings simply on that logic that their due deference from the public. And if you in any way don't follow their commands to the T, they see you as a dangerous character who is using force against them. They're legitimized to use force back against you, whether it's the force of arrest, of handcuffs, of a baton, of their fist, of their language, or of a gun.
It was so traumatic, because the thing was is that they told me that I should be glad that they didn't pull a weapon on me. They told, and then it was like a mental fuck is what it was. Like you said about the being a child thing, they absolutely 100% were invalidating me as a human being. And I'm not even going to get into some of the horrible things that they said to me about me as a person, about the fact that, you know, who I was and what I did. I must not generate any money. They had a kid in their house who was like this, that, or the other, actually asked me why I was afraid of police because I'm not black. I mean, and had a string of other things. I'm not black, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not this, I'm not that. Why would I be afraid of police? Because I was standing on the side of the road in shackles, leg irons, and cuffs. And then this officer has the nerve to ask me why I'm afraid of police. At that moment, why was I afraid of police? Because they had me detained. They had kidnapped me against my will.
Wow. You know, it's very difficult to try and put into words what I feel when I hear how you were treated, and B, how quickly a confrontation or an approach by a police resorts in an aggressive confrontation. And
I would like to add, I would like to make sure to say that I didn't say anything that wasn't civil. I was treating them in a professional manner, despite the fact that I was becoming panicked. There was not a time when I said anything derogatory about them. There was not a time when I said anything. They seemed to have a concept of what I thought, and they were parroting things that are not things that I would say. I do not hate cops. I do, however, hate the modern police paradigm model of policing, because it is absolutely, it gives them this idea of authority that they do not have over an individual. They do not have the right to dictate to me how I think, what I do for a living, how I make my living. You know, I'm a good person. I kept saying that to them. I'm a good person, and there is no reason for you to be speaking to me in this disrespectful manner. Most of these officers I am at least 10 years older than, so I'm their elder, if only by a small amount. And I might not have a prestigious title. I might not have a few $1,000s in my bank account, but I am a human being. And I was treating them with that respect, and I deserved that respect in kind.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, we were raised, we were born, we were brought up with respect, and most importantly, to respect the law. We're not anarchists. We're not looking for anarchy. Somebody needs to turn that radio down in the background. We're getting a tremendous echo feedback right now, and it's not going to help us deliver this show with quality. So, you know, for me, when I hear that, I hear somebody who has principles, who has moral, who's brought up in a correct fashion, and now you're frightened for your life. Again, we've talked about Charlie and Outlaw supporting you, and we've also had a team of us supporting you through that time. And the part of it was, after they had arrested you and taken you back to the station, they then released you to make you walk 10 miles back in the middle of the night as a single woman. And I take it you didn't get a lift from the officers either.
Hey,
No. Then they had me on the side of the road for several hours. This was not a short period of time. They kept me on the side of the road for several hours. I was in the jail, actually, for a smaller amount of time than I was detained by them on the side of the road.
Somebody who's got the show on. Hang on a minute. Somebody's got the show on in the background, and it's given a tremendous feedback. This is really going to mess up the broadcast tonight. Mute your mic, whatever it is, or turn down the radio in the background so that we can actually hear what Ninjet and Charlie are saying. Go on, Charlie. Was that you about to come in?
No, I was just listening. Oh, I think that's Outlaw.
Outlaw.
Or Auntie. I can't remember. Yeah. Who's on today?
Is it Auntie or is it Outlaw? Whichever one.
It's Outlaw.
Yeah, I'm ready to start the gardening portion now.
Okay, come on, Outlaw. Come in. You was going to come in and say something. Say it.
All right. The whole thing is, with her incident, they kept her on the side of the road. There were several phone calls made to the station trying to find out what her bond was, what her charges were, because none of that was clear upon the arrest. Okay, there were several calls. It took to get an answer. And the answer they finally came up with was they released her. And when they released her, and we were finally able to get back in touch with her, we found out that the jail didn't even book her like they do most people they arrest. Most of the time, if you, I don't, for the people who haven't been arrested, which is becoming a smaller number these days, but when you get arrested, they take your fingerprints and your thumbprints of both hands. Some departments take an entire palm print. They take your photo and anything else that you're willing to give them. They'll ask for DNA sample if you allow them to take it. But they didn't do that with Ninjet. It seemed like they wiped the jail themselves wiped their hands of it. All right.
Now, how do you then leave a woman to walk unaided and unsupported 10 miles home?
And working on the story and trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah. With Ninjet being an activist and being a reporter, the things that she was looking into, and the reason that I, for one, feel like they targeted her simply for trying to figure out what was going on. They targeted her to intimidate her to back down. Whenever a female is to get arrested or searched, they normally have to have a female officer called in if there isn't one on the scene. There's never more than one female officer on a scene immediately. And in Jet's case, there were at least 3, I believe.
It was 3 really big, and one of them was a really large girl, and they were intimidating, and it was like breaking the sister code, because they were absolutely just vicious towards me, and I was not giving them any kind of trouble whatsoever, except to try to create that distance between themselves and me as far as my danger factor went. My panic was off the scale, and it wasn't just the fact that I was in a panicked state. There was an instinct going on that there was aggressiveness there, and as soon as you feel that aggressiveness, it fuels the panic, because you realize that you're in very real danger. And I felt as if I was in very real danger, and I don't think that was just my perception. I think that was my reality.
Many of the individuals that we've seen lose their lives recently would probably not thought at the time that they were being stopped that their lives were about to come to a very short end. And it's becoming with alarming increased paranoia that people are now sitting down there thinking to themselves, well, am I actually going to come through this alive? And that's just on a basic routine stop. So, Charlie, if I can come back to you a moment, your dilemma was on the white collar scale. It wasn't so much on the streets as it was with Ninjet. Yours was more a white collar form of corruption, but yet you still face the same level of corruption and mistrust, right?
Oh, certainly. If not more, in the sense of a wider scale of actors being involved, all protecting the status quo in the system. But yeah, no, you're not. We've allowed the police force to become the political enforcement unit of those who hold formal power. That is what has become the police, and they will be used against anybody. And of course, we see this nationally with like a case of Edward Snowden or something like that. But what we tend to overlook, partly because of the way our news is delivered and partly because of the way we're so focused nationally, but we overlook how often this is being done on a day-to-day basis to anybody who dares stand up to authority. And it can be going after the jugular of corruption authority like I might have done, but it can also be just standing up to a clerk of a court, who refuses to do their job. And I'm making that reference for a reason, but not because something like this has happened, other than clerk of courts who refuse to do their job. We know that with the with the case with the woman with the marriage licenses. But oftentimes someone who has a right will sit there and will get loud and will tell that clerk of the court, no, I have a right. And then next thing you know, the police are called in. And you are removed from a public building where you have a right to be to do public business simply because you didn't show them due deference. And if you in any way make the police officers feel like they have to, extra, encourage you to go out the door rather than you just do so, passively, then you can get arrested for trespassing in that public building and then get arrested for resisting arrest for nothing more than saying to the officer, why are you arresting me? And these things escalate and escalate. And oftentimes, like a Sandra Bland case, merely for an unlawful traffic stop, if you don't show that deference and you have some knowledge of your rights, you become a bigger troublemaker. And then, and it can lead to the most, the final, outcome, of course, being death. And we see this. It's happening daily now in front of our eyes.
And there is such a massive outcry and movement to stand against this injustice and police brutality. One of the things that I found very, very surprising indeed was the lack of coverage on the march into Washington, D.C. on the 10th of October, where hundreds and thousands of people took over Washington, D.C. And yet no news channel, no news station covered it or gave it any coverage.
Yeah.
Did you guys get any? Go on, Ninja.
That's typical right now. Mainstream media. That's why people who are citizen journalists are such a threat to this entire thing, because they don't like the 24-hour news cycle, because the 24-hour news cycle carries all of that information. They try to demean it because they say it's not a real news source or whatever. The mainstream media is painting what it is being paid to paint. That is what we need to remember. This is like a court painter back in the day. This is not something that is operating on any journalistic principle. It's operating on an entirely different principle. And these situations are absolutely pointing to the fact that we as the people need to be the media. We have that opportunity now. We have the technology. We need to be the media, and we need to be the ones who actually document what is actually happening in order for this to have any kind of historical relevance for the next generations.
Absolutely. Now, so there you guys go. You've both been treated unfairly, both been treated unjust. You've both been arrested. You've both been charged. You both have to go to court. And now you're left in the hands of the Honourable Public Defender.
Yeah.
And I would like to add that in the back of the cruiser, as I was being taken to the jail, the female officer who was driving the car actually asked me if this would change the way that I would deal with police in the future. And when I told her that it would probably make me more fearful, she threatened me with an extra charge of obstruction of justice.
Wow. Well, if that's not intimidation, nothing else is. But you now end up having to find a public defender in order to support you at trial. Now, Charlie, you have had the most horrific experience in trying to get a public defender, A, to take your case, or B, to represent you, or C, to do it any justice whatsoever. Do you want to take us a little bit through that?
Well, and I've been down this road before, but this is probably the most egregious example of it, and it's in the case that stems from my being trespassed for living in my father's hospital room with him, which I was allowed to do, but daring to speak out about the Medicare fraud and the medical malpractice that was going on. I was arrested for trespassing and resisting arrest, all on videotape, which shows that the arrest was unlawful, that I was doing nothing illegal. And yet I'm given the office of the public defender. They won't return my phone calls. They won't return my emails. They only speak to me, the 5 minutes before we go into court. I instruct them to file certain motions. They say, well, we've got another strategy. We got this motion, and actually that motion I approved of, but was never even given a copy in advance to read. When I finally did get it, it wasn't because I asked them for it. They ignored my emails asking for it and my phone calls, but they gave it to a law professor who is representing me in a tangential case. With him reluctantly as well, he gave it to me. I read the thing and I almost flipped because it was so poorly written. It shouldn't have been submitted in a first-year law class, and it missed half the points. It conceded things that were untrue, and we weren't. I wasn't planning on conceding it. It overlooked the core and the key, and I said numerous times, we need to meet before, we need to amend this, we need to meet. Not a word until I get there. And that morning they tell me, oh, well, and I said, well, look, you got to tell me, is it strategically you wrote it like this? I mean, is there a reason? Let's get into it. And the next thing they do is they throw a piece of paper in front of me and they say, well, look what evidence we just got today. And it's mispresented to me as something that it's not, because they don't actually give me my own copy. It wasn't sufficient to change our position on our motion, but they acted like it was. And worse is that, why were they being given it that day? I mean, the last minute, the story of the official line changes. And one of the reasons for that is because despite my instructions, they've refused to what's called depose the officers making the allegations and the witnesses, which I have a right to do, to find out what their testimony is going to be. So the prosecutor just presents something, at the last minute to meet anything that we're going to say, whether it be pre-trial or at trial. And I've seen this done before. They just make it up as they go.
But look,
and the police are willing to lie. But the worst thing about it is that document I had gotten months before they did.
Here's the thing. Here out in the UK, right? If you get arrested and you haven't got your own solicitor, you go to court and you haven't got a solicitor, you're allowed what's referred to in this country as a duty solicitor. When it's court appointed, but it's a duty solicitor, and that duty solicitor, guys, could somebody turn that down, please? That duty solicitor is from a local solicitor's office, and it's on a rota system. So this guy is there at the court, and he makes himself available to anybody who hasn't got anybody to represent him, and he has no other interest apart from that of representing the firm that he's employed by. So he's not actually employed by the court. He's employed by a firm, and the firm is on a rota basis. So therefore, he comes to you because, as far as I'm aware, my solicitor represents me. My solicitor takes instruction from me. So I turn around and I say, well, look, this is what my defense is. This is what they've charged me up with. This is what took place, and this is what I'm going to say happened. Now, my solicitor's role is to advise me as to how that's going to sound in court, and to give me advice as to whether or not that's the right way for me to be going forward as far as the law of court is concerned. But then I still have the right to turn around and say, well, listen, you're my solicitor, and this is how I want to do it. Right? And he will turn around and say, well, you know what, mate, it's your funeral. I'll represent you. I'll stand down and ask the questions that you want me to ask. If you want me to do it this way, then this is the way I'll do it. But I can assure you that if you do it that way, you may well end up getting a guilty verdict or whatever. But it's not the solicitor's position to dismiss your contribution, to reject your involvement, or to take it upon himself to represent you with his own analogy of what he thinks your case should be.
Oh, and as you know, in my case, as I wrote in my motion supporting their motion to withdraw, because they made a lot. I mean, they wanted out of the case eventually after I put my foot down and said, no, it's going to be done this way, because they were telling me, no, they used this word, dictate to me everything that's going to be done, and that my only role is to show up when the court sends me a notification with a date and a time. I show up, I do what they say, they dictate to me. And I said, that's not going to happen. Oh. But that was their position. And in fact, I even had one call me after they removed the original one who was on the case. I got an email saying these two others are going to be my counsel, the head of the office. And then I get a phone call from a guy. I've never met him before. I've never talked to him. He quickly says his last name. I don't really get it. And then he tells me who he is. And he says, so I'm going to file a motion for speedy trial. Now, these people haven't even gotten the evidence against me. And I've instructed them to get it and give me a copy. I've even made public records requests for what they have, only to learn that they've never even bothered to look at the evidence. They don't even have a copy of it because they can't even give it to me via public records because they never bothered to get it. And yet they're prepared to go to trial. And this guy who's never met me in the height of all this says, I'm filing a motion for speedy trial. I then ask him, after I tell him about 100 times no, I said, let me write down your name. How do you spell it and what's your phone number? And he says, you'll get that when you receive notice to appear in court, and we'll meet that day. And then he hung up the phone on me.
Wow. Well, listen, we've got only a few minutes left. I want to bring Ninjet in just before we finish the show. We're 4 minutes to 8 o'clock, and we do have DJ iSean coming to you live from New York right after this show at 8 o'clock. But Ninjet, both you and Charlie are still facing charges, have yet to see your courts, your cases come to a close. Where do you go from here? How do you see things panning out for you from here? Just in a couple of minutes.
I don't know how mine is going to happen. I still don't even have what Charlie was saying, I still don't even have a clear idea from my public defender what or how he's going to defend me. And it's only been in the last week that I have been able to even face the world in a minimal sense. I mean, I have seriously been so traumatized by this that I haven't been able to even communicate in a meaningful manner like this. This is the first time that I've had actually a conversation about this since it happened in any kind of meaningful way where I didn't break down. And I would like to make sure that everybody who helped and everybody who has been praying for me, I would like to tell them thank you, because it has meant the world to me.
I know. I can actually hear the emotion as it shakes through you. Guys, I just want to thank you both again for being on the show tonight. Thank you again, Outlaw, for being down there on the sidelines. Outlaw just wanted a live feed so that he can hear it in real time. And I'd like to thank you,
Kervin.
It's our pleasure.
And both Ninjet and I are in court on Monday.
Well, we'll be praying for you, that's for sure. And we look forward to catching up and maybe revisiting this again and taking this to a whole new level. But
next time we'll talk about jury nullification, right, Kervin?
Absolutely, most definitely. Guys, thank you very much for being on the show, and we will speak again real soon. That's it for now on Issues Today, and we've been talking about On the Front Line, the active actors with Ninja Whoop Whoop, and
Whoop Whoop,
Whoop Whoop, and Charlie Grabsky. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks.
Okay, that's gonna be about it. So it's gonna be time for me to just hand over to iSean, DJ iSean from America, live from New York. He's gonna be coming up right after this.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity. This is clarity.
Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. What if I had the solution to every problem you had? And I seen you drowning in sorrow, but never offered a hand. What if the whole world was made of people just like me? And I claim that I wanted change, and never realized change starts with me. Yeah. See, the truth is that before you change, never realized change starts with me. The gift of a life. See, the truth is that before you change, never realized until you change me. Da, 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 da. What if it changed me? What if giving to you changed me? What if it changed me? What if we ran out of money?
From the Jam Global Radio, this is Clarity.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
It's time for your new DJ here on World Jam Global Radio. As you know, World Jam Global DJs transmit from around the world. All viewers, please wait 30 seconds after this transmission. Then press play for your new DJ.
From the Jam Global Radio, this is Clarity.